Under the shimmer of flashbulbs, she seemed untouchable. Marilyn Monroe was not a woman. She was a vision stitched from satin and spotlight, a dream that smiled back at the audience with perfect lips and eyes like wounded glass. She smiled for the camera, and cried when it turned away. Men saw in her the promise of desire without consequence, beauty without burden. But behind every portrait, behind every champagne toast, there lingered a silence that none of them could decode. They clapped when she entered the room, but no one noticed when she left. Presidents and poets, athletes and actors, all claimed her in fragments, like pieces of a relic to display, but never to protect. She became the ultimate reflection, every man's fantasy, no man's responsibility. They adored her laughter, yet none stayed long enough to understand the tremor beneath it. The role made her famous. It also broke her. In dim hotel suites, she whispered dreams to men who had already turned toward tomorrow. The audience believed the kiss, but he'd already fallen out of love. Some men promised her safety, but their safety was only possession. Others promised eternity, but eternity never lasted past the morning. She carried herself into these liaisons not as scandal, but as prayer. A wish that someone might see Norma Jean beneath the diamonds, beneath the painted lips, beneath the woman who had learned that intimacy could be currency. Her name stayed on posters, but not on the lips of those she loved, and so she drifted, a fragile constellation moving through rooms where tuxedos gleamed. He wore tuxedos on screen. In real life he wore guilt. She wore her heart as openly as a gown, asking with every embrace the same quiet question. Would this be the one who stayed? No one dared ask. She never told, until it was too late. Marilyn burned like no other. In beauty, in longing, in sorrow. She was not conquered by scandal, nor diminished by whispers. She was undone by loneliness dressed as devotion. And as the curtain closed on each affair, she was left once more in the shadows, waiting for a love that never came. She laughed too loudly, as if the sound itself could silence the ache. In the mirrored glow of Broadway dressing rooms, Tallulah Bankhead became more than a woman. She became a storm. To her audiences she was irresistible, a spark wrapped in satin, her wit sharp enough to slice through the smoky haze of any nightclub. They clapped when she entered the room, but no one noticed when she left. She smiled for the camera, and cried when it turned away. The photographs caught her at angles that suggested eternity, but behind every glamorous pose was a soul exhausted by its own restlessness. Tallulah's romances were whispered about like scandals carried on the wind. Men of power, women of beauty, strangers who mattered for 1 hour and were forgotten by the next. She did not chase approval. She chased escape. Intimacy was her theater, but it was always staged beneath the shadow of loneliness. The role made her famous. It also broke her. Hollywood wanted to tame her, to package her into something safe, but Tallulah lived as though she had been born without a brake pedal. She swerved into excess, into nights that blurred into mornings, into laughter that covered the sound of doors slamming shut. No one dared ask. She never told, until it was too late. In truth, she wasn't giving herself away for power or fame. She was giving herself away to prove that she belonged to no one. A martini in hand, a stranger's hand in hers, and still the emptiness waited for her when the music stopped. Her name stayed on posters, but not on the lips of those she loved. The audience believed the kiss, but he'd already fallen out of love, and she had already prepared her exit. Beneath her flame was ash, and beneath her laughter was silence. For Tallulah the curtain never closed. It only shifted to another stage, another scene, another fleeting embrace. And so the question lingered, long after her laughter faded. What happens to the flame when it burns too brightly, too fast? She smiled for the camera, and cried when it turned away. Ava Gardner was the living dream of an era that thrived on illusions, a woman sculpted from shadow and spotlight, silk and smoke. To the magazines she was the most beautiful woman alive, the siren who could bring any man to his knees with a glance, the goddess in satin who seemed to belong to everyone and no one at once. They clapped when she entered the room, but no one noticed when she left, for behind the champagne flutes and the flashbulbs Ava's heart was rarely seen, and even more rarely held. The world adored her, but the world adored its own invention. Men lined up for her, yet few ever truly looked into her. Frank Sinatra, bold and bruised by his own demons, tore himself apart for her, their love as explosive as it was destructive. He wore tuxedos on screen. In real life, he wore guilt, the weight of never being able to give Ava the steady ground she craved. Bullfighters in Spain courted her with roses and danger. Tycoons spoiled her with yachts and diamonds. Yet Ava, in her quietest hours, often lay in silence, searching the ceiling as if it might whisper back the answer to a question she could never frame. Her beauty was a role she never auditioned for. The role made her famous. It also broke her. Hollywood sold her as a temptress, as the eternal flame no man could resist, and for a time she leaned into the script, living as if passion might be enough to soften the loneliness that followed. But passion, like thunder, is always followed by silence. Her nights were filled with music and wine, voices swirling around her, embraces that seemed unbreakable until morning came. Then the curtain fell. The audience believed the kiss, but he'd already fallen out of love. Ava lived like a storm arriving suddenly, leaving devastation, yet always chasing the horizon herself. Those who adored her adored a dream, and dreams do not stay. No one dared ask. She never told, until it was too late. Her name stayed on posters, but not on the lips of those she loved. To herself she was always searching for a hand that wouldn't let go, a voice that would still be there when the music stopped. She never found it, and yet she never stopped looking, as though the next room, the next city, the next man might hold the promise she craved. In the end, Ava Gardner was not a woman conquered by love, but a woman who dared to chase it, reckless and brave, even when it left her alone at dawn. And so her legend remains, a star who burned brightly, loved fiercely, and lived in the echo of a longing that outlived her beauty. Somewhere in that echo, she lingers still, waiting for the one embrace that might finally last longer than a song. She smiled for the camera, and cried when it turned away. For Joan Crawford, that smile was more than an expression. It was a weapon, a currency, a lifeline. Hollywood was a place where every glance could be a transaction, and Joan understood that better than most. She was not born into satin gowns and mirrored ballrooms. She came from hardship, a girl who scrubbed floors, who sewed dresses until her fingers bled. She carried hunger with her into every studio office, and she learned quickly that desire could be a ladder if you were brave enough to climb. The role made her famous. It also broke her. Producers called her ambitious, men called her irresistible, but Joan knew the truth. Survival often meant surrendering to desire she did not feel. Lovers mistook her hunger for passion, and sometimes she let them believe it. Because in their illusion she found opportunity. She burned through men-like roles, not because she was cruel, but because permanence was a luxury Hollywood never allowed her. Yet ambition did not erase her heart. Beneath the satin and steel, she remained that poor girl, yearning for safety, terrified of the emptiness waiting when the applause faded. She loved fiercely, but fear stood between her and happiness. He wore tuxedos on screen. In real life, he wore guilt. The audience believed the kiss, but he'd already fallen out of love. Her name stayed on posters, but not on the lips of those she loved. Lovers remembered her as electric, unforgettable, but rarely gentle. Joan was a flame no one could hold, a woman who mastered the rules of a game designed to consume her. No one dared ask. She never told, until it was too late. And so, when we remember Joan Crawford, we remember not only the star who could command a screen with a glance, but the woman who paid for survival with desire, and who built a kingdom out of loneliness disguised as triumph. She clapped when she entered the room, but no one noticed when she left. She didn't walk into rooms. She owned them. Mae West carried herself like a punchline wrapped in perfume, a wink stitched into every step. Desire for her was not a secret whispered in dark corners. It was theater, and she was its brightest star. She spoke of lovers the way others spoke of cocktails, plentiful, intoxicating, and never enough. And yet, for all her excess, she was never consumed. She consumed the myth of herself and served it back with a smirk. Her one-liners became her shield. When asked about her reputation, she'd lace her answers with laughter, and the world would chuckle along, never realizing she was hiding a softness too fragile to expose. Men lined up, drawn not just by her body, but by the audacity of a woman who refused to apologize for it. She reminded them with every sly glance that it was she who chose, not they. The audience believed the kiss, but he'd already fallen out of love, and she knew it before he did. For Mae, the stage of intimacy was always on her terms. She turned scandal into spectacle, rumor into applause. They clapped when she entered the room, but no one noticed when she left, carrying the silence of a woman who built her own armor in a world eager to strip it away. She smiled for the camera, and cried when it turned away. Did she love them? Maybe. Did she need them? Never. Behind the humor, behind the rhinestones and double entendres, was a woman who had seen the cost of vulnerability. She loved herself fiercely enough to hold the upper hand, even if it meant sleeping alone in rooms where laughter had long since faded. The role made her famous. It also broke her, but only in ways she allowed. Mae West's greatest affair was not with the men who passed through her bed, but with the idea that a woman could own her desire without shame. She was the girl every marquis adored, the goddess whose beauty seemed carved for silver light. They called her the Sweater Girl, as though her entire being could be contained in a nickname stitched from fabric. But Lana Turner was more than a shape, more than the curve of her smile or the tilt of her head. She smiled for the camera, and cried when it turned away. Men surrounded her like moths circling a lamp, drawn not to her warmth but to the glow they thought they could possess. Producers offered her contracts with promises hidden between the lines. Actors leaned too close, their kisses rehearsed long before the script called for them. Gangsters slipped into her life like shadows at midnight, bringing danger in exchange for devotion. The role made her famous. It also broke her. For all the diamonds and champagne, what Lana wanted was something painfully ordinary, someone who would stay. She gave herself to men who swore they would, and each time the vow dissolved into silence. No one dared ask. She never to LD until it was too late. Some nights, bruises told stories her lips could not. Other nights, loneliness sat beside her in the quiet, heavier than any lover's arm. Her name stayed on posters, but not on the lips of those she loved. In the tabloids, she was a goddess. In her living room, she was a woman tracing the outline of absence. They clapped when she entered the room, but no one noticed when she left. Lana carried her heartbreak like a secret costume, invisible yet always worn. The audience believed the kiss, but he'd already fallen out of love. And still she played her part because the world demanded its goddess, even if the woman beneath could no longer bear the weight of worship. The love goddess lived in light, but her nights belonged to shadows, and the shadows always won. She smiled for the camera, and cried when it turned away. Rita Hayworth was the dream pinned above barracks beds, the woman whose smile carried soldiers through nights of gunfire and longing. She was a goddess born of shadows and studio lights, the poster girl of an age that worshipped desire. They clapped when she entered the room, but no one noticed when she left. For when the gowns were unzipped and the rouge wiped away, Rita was not the goddess men dreamed of. She was Margarita Cancino, a girl who wanted only a home that would not vanish when the sun rose. Her marriages read like fairy tales written in fading ink, an actor's devotion, a producer's empire, a prince's crown. All were hers for a season. Each time she gave herself fully, as if love itself might be rewritten by her surrender. Each time she believed, and each time the promises fell away like paper in the rain. The audience believed the kiss, but he'd already fallen out of love. Her beauty was currency in a world that mistook her for its invention. The role made her famous. It also broke her. To her lovers, she was the love goddess. To herself, she was only a woman who kept trusting the wrong men, waiting for one who would see beyond the painted lips and trembling hands. He wore tuxedos on screen. In real life, he wore guilt, and she carried the cost of that guilt in silence. Her name stayed on posters, but not on the lips of those she loved. No one dared ask. She never told, until it was too late. Her daughters remembered the mother who tried. The world remembered the goddess who never belonged. And in between was Rita, alone in her longing, haunted by the applause that drowned out her quiet wish to be ordinary. She lived adored by millions, but cradled by none, and so the goddess of desire spent her life searching for a love that would outlast her reflection, a search that ended not in triumph, but in solitude. Some legends are crowned by the world, only to be abandoned by the very hands that crowned them. Rita was one of those legends, and in the stillness of her memory she remains, the goddess who longed only to belong. She smiled for the camera, and cried when it turned away. Jean Harlow was light captured in human form, the first platinum blonde, the bombshell who shimmered even when the room was already glowing. Men saw her as a dream sculpted in satin, a living promise of desire. But for Jean, love was never a choice. It was a chase. Perhaps she knew, even in her youth, that time was a fuse burning too quickly, and so she gave herself freely, recklessly, as if tomorrow might never come. The role made her famous. It also broke her. She laughed with abandon on screen, her voice a melody of mischief, her presence a magnet to anyone near. But in the stillness after the applause, her laughter fell into silence. Her lovers remembered her as thrilling, irresistible, the girl who never said no. Yet when the champagne dried and the music faded, she was often left staring at the ceiling, wondering why. No one stayed. They clapped when she entered the room, But no one noticed when she left. Her marriages were brief, her affairs countless, but her heart, fragile, hopeful, longed for permanence in a world that only offered passing touches. The audience believed the kiss, but he'd already fallen out of love. He wore tuxedos on screen. In real life, he wore guilt. And Jean, for all her radiance, carried the weight of being wanted but not truly loved. Her name stayed on posters, but not on the lips of those she loved. Behind the legend of the platinum doll was a woman haunted by the fear of being forgotten. She loved recklessly because she knew love would leave quickly. No one dared ask. She never told, until it was too late. And so Jean Harlow's story is not one of scandal, but of sorrow disguised as champagne, of restless arms that never found rest, and a light that flickered out far too soon. The curtain falls softly, but the echoes remain. Hollywood remembers the women in diamonds and satin, frozen forever in a glow that never fades. Yet the whispers remember something different. Not the scandal, but the silence between heartbeats, the moments when beauty was only a mask for longing. They called them reckless, infamous, lovers of too many, but the truth was never about numbers. It was about need, about loneliness dressed in silk, about hope trembling in the half-light of borrowed arms. Marilyn searched for tenderness, chasing it like a child reaching for a hand in the dark. Ava craved passion, burning through every embrace as if fire itself might save her. Rita longed for permanence, to anchor herself against the tides of abandonment. Jean sought reassurance, wanting simply to believe she was enough. Each affair was less about scandal than survival, less about desire than about the fragile hope that someone, somewhere, might stay. They clapped when they entered the room, but no one. He noticed when they left. The golden age made them eternal, carved into myths as luminous as the screens that held them. But myths are lonely. They do not weep. They do not ache in the hollow of night. These women did. They were not just lovers of men. They were lovers of life itself, reckless because time in Hollywood always ran out too fast. Her name stayed on posters, but not on the lips of those she loved. She smiled for the camera and cried when it turned away. No one dared ask. She never told. Until it was too late. The men who held them are shadows now, forgotten, their tuxedos gone to dust. He wore tuxedos on screen. In real life, he wore guilt. But the women remain, radiant still, glowing in reels that never stop spinning, beautiful even in tragedy. In the end, their intimacy was not infamy, it was poetry. A love letter written in whispers and broken promises, in hotel rooms and hurried goodbyes. They loved recklessly because they lived recklessly, and they lived recklessly because in Hollywood tomorrow was never promised. The audience believed the kiss, but he'd already fallen out of love, and still they kissed, not for him, not for scandal, but for the fleeting warmth of being held. The curtain after desire is quiet, but listen closely and you will hear it. The heartbeat of legends who were not untouchable after all. They were fragile, luminous, achingly human. They were ours. They still are.